Welcome back to Faith Ventures. I'm Dr. Norman Horn, and we are here with another great episode to talk about integrating faith and work in our lives. Today, I am joined by a gentleman I've only come to know very recently, but he's just a fascinating individual. This is Nathan Newton. He is the president of Brian's Masterpiece in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is a custom hardwood flooring company that is multi-generational and is just amazing craftsmanship that you can see on their website. And look at the beautiful things that they create. Nathan, welcome to the show. I'm so happy that we've been introduced and we're able to talk about this stuff today.
Thanks, Norman. Glad to join you. Thanks for having me on.
So first off, we just kind of want to, as we always do here at Faith Ventures, want to talk about how did you become the businessman, entrepreneur, and craftsman of today? In other words, let's talk about how has your career developed and how did you get to be where you are today?
Yeah, so it's, I guess, some things typical, some not. So as a kid, I loved watching cooking shows and everything. And so my first career, I was actually in pastries down working on the Las Vegas Strip, worked at a couple of restaurants, and just loved being creative. And so would go on my dad's workshop and mess up all of his tools and leave them everywhere that I went. But again, just enjoyed the process of being creative. And so after a couple of years in the world of culinary, I realized that the pay is terrible and the hours are terrible. All the pastry chefs were divorced with 4 kids and working a ridiculous amount of hours for $80,000 a year. And so after a couple of years, I was like, this is not the life I want.
Oh, man.
Never had intentions of particularly working for my dad because I had done some summers here and there where I had to sweep floors and tear out tile and deliver 80-pound bundles of wood into somebody's house in the summertime. And so none of that was fun for me, but there is a lot of creativity to the craft. And so when I was 19, I went to go work for my dad, and because I knew there was opportunity there, the business was going well. And so then started in that. And the one thing I'm very thankful for is my dad never let me skip any steps. I had to do all the terrible jobs until I was good at them and work my way up to the more important tasks. And so with that, I had to earn the respect of the guys around me, and I learned every aspect of the trade. And so that helped me in running the business now because I understand the entire process of what it takes to do the job. But before I actually got to this position, there was many years of working for my dad where he kept the company small and he didn't want it to grow at all. And he had no plans of retirement. So after several years of arguing with him daily or multiple times a day about what we should do with the business, he put his foot down and just said, "Nope, this is my business. This is the way I want to run it. And so you can either go start your own business or stay what you're doing." And so I actually decided to go look for work elsewhere, and I ended up moving to Texas for 3 years and tried the corporate job and the corporate world. And that was a great experience for the fact that I learned a lot of business management, people management, just understanding how to, for cost strategies and pricing strategies and how to increase margins and just a lot of business acumen that I got on someone else's dime. And that was great. And so one day my dad is planning a trip to Houston to come visit us, and he says he's going to retire. And my loving wife, who is amazing, and I would not be where I am today without her, she says, "Ask your dad for the business." And so I'm saying, he'll never give it to me. He never will want me running the business the way that I want to run it. He wouldn't be able to live with himself. So we talk about it, and he says, "Let me pray about it." And a week later, he says, "Let's do it." And 4 weeks later, I was moving back to Las Vegas from Houston, Texas.
Wow. That's a really cool. And so, I love that you had to never skip any steps. That's a fun phrase. I always look for, by the way, I always look for how am I going to title this episode? I think you just found it within the first minute. That's pretty great. Never skip any steps. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about how valuable was that to you, both from kind of just a pure skill perspective, I suppose, on one level, but also just what were some of the meta lessons that you kind of took through that process?
Well, yeah, it was interesting because I never realized it or appreciated it until I took the corporate job. Mm-hmm. Because as I work through solutions and had to perform my tasks. It was funny is my dad is an extremely detailed person. I'm not nearly as detailed as him. But when I was in the corporate world, everyone's like, man, you're so detailed on everything. I'm like, actually, I'm good at it, but because I've been working with my father, who is extremely detailed. And so it just helped that. And even taking the task where it's like, hey, these tasks are terrible, but it's part of doing the job. And you don't get to enjoy the satisfactory parts without getting to the parts that you hate doing.
Yeah. Do you feel like like, did your dad use kind of, dare I say, scriptural principles or ways in which, like, how did he encourage you through that? Perhaps with with sort of a faith bent too. I can only imagine.
Yeah, so it's one of those things. It's here's what needs to be done for the job, and we do every job in excellence. So I'm very grateful that both my parents are Christian, and my dad, even though he's retired, we still get together Monday mornings and pray together to start the week off. So he comes out of the office every Monday morning and pray together. But it's one of those things that it's being faithful in the little things that should be faithful in the bigger things. And if you start and do the job excellent all the way through, like it's in Proverbs, it says that you will stand before kings, and that's who we do work for today. We don't think of the high net worth individual today as kings and royalty, but essentially, the work that we do for people with insane resources. And so those are the people
Sure.
that we garner the respect of because of what we do.
Awesome. It's really neat. Yeah, that's a neat journey to kind of go through. And so you've been in the corporate world. You're now running, would you call it, I guess, a small business, or is it getting, how big is this thing now at this point?
So it's still a small business. When I took over, there were 12 employees, and I'm up to 24 now.
Oh my goodness.
My goal is to get to 40. And
Wow.
so I think my bandwidth and my skill set and just what I think I will be content with, Lord willing, we'll see when we get there, is getting to about 40 employees. And I think it's a good, sustainable business for just the Las Vegas market and my niche.
That is awesome. Well, let me kind of turn a slightly different direction here. Let's get back to kind of your development here. Can you identify, for instance, some like moments in your journey where your faith really played a role in the decisions that you had to make in your business in some way? Like, what are some of those things that might have come to mind there?
Yeah, a couple of them are one, just in a sense, providing for your family in a meaningful way. And so let's say that, before I left for Texas, I wasn't making a decent living, but, when you want to show your family and your kids, here's what hard work looks like. Here's what it means to be excellent in everything that you do. And so sometimes you have to take opportunities to show how you can be excellent in those things. And it's funny is even as I was developing and getting to where I'm at now, I would test things on my wife and kids. And so as I was working through some speech or some skill that I needed, I would practice on them and say, all right, tell me how this sounds, or, hey, I need to try this. And so they were my guinea pigs. And so in business and in life, there's always the trouble or the trap of trying to take the easy way,
Mhm.
or trying to find some way in which you can get ahead through means that aren't godly. And so corporate world and in construction, there's a lot of shady people, a lot of people who will say this and do that. And so I would say having a good role model as a father too also shaped me. Seeing my dad eat thousands and thousands of dollars on a job to do the right thing, and seeing that it was a hard decision and it was hard for him to say, this is what we need to do, but regularly seeing him, do the right thing in those hard moments.
So very much you learned by example. Now you teach by example.
Yes, and
to your kids.
To my kids and even to my employees now. I don't have any employees that are believers, but we sit down and we talk about it. We go, man, this is terrible, and I hate that I have to do this, but it's like, this is the right decision. So this is what we're going to do, because we're going to leave at the end of the day knowing that we did the right thing and not having to, worry if we're going to get a lawsuit or, we trick somebody out of something. It's, just want to make sure at the end of the day, we've always done the right thing.
From a managerial perspective, and you just said something that was kind of interesting, and you said you don't have a lot of employees who are believers. How do you find that your faith helps you to interact with them? And do you see? And I'm not necessarily saying from the perspective of like trying to just evangelize qua evangelism. I mean, that's always nice, but like that's not always. We're not there in the business place to directly evangelize like that. That's a different story. But you do convey like it's like the kind of preach Christ and if you must use words mentality. I'm curious how you specifically noting that you don't have a lot of believers working for you. You note a little bit already about how that example does shine forth. But what other things in that respect do you find you continue to kind of teach your people in this regard? Are there other examples that you said or things that you say? How does that come out?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll start with the simple, easy one, the golden rule, and treat others how you want to be treated.
Yeah.
And with my managers, I won't be explicit with some biblical content at first when I'm going through and walking them through how to have a conversation or, hey, we want to, build this kind of culture or instill these types of behaviors. And so as it comes through and I have those opportunities, well, I'll throw a biblical principle in there and they'll go, oh, that's really good. I like that. And then we'll give you the opportunity to go, well, actually, that's the Bible that teaches those things. And so that sounds like, I didn't think of that. I'm glad you think it's cool, but it wasn't me. I got that from the Bible, and here's where you can find it. And so I'm able to sneak things in like that where, it's not necessarily gospel conversations, but it's a clear way to show like, hey, the Bible is my authority, and I operate off of what the Bible teaches me about how to run a business, how to manage people. And so I can teach them those principles. And I see it's really cool before hearing that it came from the Bible.
Yeah, and there's wisdom in that too, to show that those sorts of principles are always at play. They always have been.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. Yeah. So anything else in that regard? I mean, like what other experiences have you had that where, your faith has helped kind of guide you as a business person here? What sort of things come to mind in that respect?
And so, when you have a family and everything else, so your faith and trying to find those lines of when do you put work first or when do you put family first and church and those types of things. And so having, the Bible and having godly people around, you can work through those issues because it is very easy to, if you're finding success in a certain area of life, even in business, it's easy to neglect everything else because, hey, I'm seeing results. Things are going well here. I'm just going to hang out in this area. So it does help keep a perspective where a client is calling at 9:00 at night because they have a question and going, nope, I'm spending time with my family right now. I'm not going to take this call. They can wait till tomorrow. And so, and it also gives opportunity when you talk to clients as well in the way that you talk to them and the way that you address them and the way that you want to, in a sense, I try to go overboard in showing that, hey, with honesty and integrity and all these biblical principles, the fruits of the Spirit, in dealing with customers, even the difficult ones, and that I want to handle them how Christ would handle them. And so hopefully have the opportunity to share the gospel with these people.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So do you find then that, that as you're kind of importing your faith into your business, then sometimes you even sort of import your business into the other parts of your life or whatnot. Do you find that to kind of, what sort of conflicts that can kind of come up as a result of trying to do some of those things? Have you observed some of those, or what sorts of things have you observed there?
Yeah, well, I am a sinful person, and so sometimes there's great opportunities to show Christ and to be a light, and I fall flat on my face, and so then I have to go back, to my family, to my clients, to my employees, and go, "Hey, I messed up here, and so I need to ask for forgiveness." And so, the difficulties of, especially specifically in family, because when you're a business owner, people call you at all times of day. They want answers now. And so when you are trying to hang out with your family, your kids and your wife, they see what you're making a priority. And so it's, I would say, and I've struggled with that with many years of how do I deal with some of those facets where my wife's like, yeah, it's okay, go take that phone call. But it's like, no, I shouldn't have. I should be here, because here's a family doing this thing. And so I should put the family first. And instead of work is not the only thing in our life. So make sure I put that first right now because that's what's called.
So you said another thing that was interesting there, and I want to seize upon it for a moment, and that's, I observe, at least in my business dealings and whatnot, a lot of folks really don't like to admit when they're wrong. Do you find that, I mean, you've admitted outright, you fall on your face sometimes, and so do I, for that matter. But do you find that as a leader, when you bring those things up to your people or to your clients, like that's unusual, I think, for some people to experience that level of transparency and willingness to say, look, this is how I messed up. What sorts of responses have you gotten to things like that? I mean, especially as someone who's creating a very direct custom product for a client, and then you have to admit that something's wrong. Oh man, it's different than, say, me making one of my mass produced products or whatnot, and I have to renew a warranty or something. That's a very different thing, it seems like. So, can you unpack that a little bit for me?
Yeah. So I would say within my business with my employees, admitting that you're wrong is something I really tried to instill, and has worked very well. It's one of those things I have seen consistently that, hey, you admit that you're wrong, you take ownership without making excuses for why you did. Hey, man, I failed you here, and I'm sorry, and you move on from there. It's always when you try to make some excuses that you get in trouble. And so I would say that's received really well. And in the business world and dealing with clients, I would say it's largely very similar in the way that people respond is when you go to them and say, hey, we messed up here. Here's what we're going to do to make it right. And so, yes, they're frustrated in the moment, but at the end, they have respect for you because you called out the issue before they even realized it or recognized it, and that you're going to address it. And then they see that you did what it took to make it right. And so at the end of the day, they go, oh, you're awesome. You are a man of your word. And so it's amazing that even with the world of litigation and contracts and everything else, how much business I still do within a job that's just on a verbal yes or no.
Yeah.
And, because I built that trust with them going, hey, here's what we're going to do. They said, okay, just do it. I'll pay you. And so I would say it has very rarely ever been a negative or a long-term negative for not admitting that you messed up and you need to make it right.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really interesting because I think there's so many sectors where that is just not super operative. We don't experience that level of kind of that closeness to a customer in many areas, like myself included. Like there's some things where we've gotten close to that, but yeah, it's just that's interesting to kind of hear.
Because there's times where customer will give me the keys to his house and says I'll be out of the country for the next month, be done by the time I get back. Make sure it's right.
That's pretty impressive, yeah.
And so when you deal with those situations, it's if you're not going to meet the deadline or that kind of thing, lying about it or trying to come up with some excuse just never goes well. And when you're dealing with high level people, I'm dealing with CEOs and other very high level individuals. They know when you're trying to give them a load of BS and that you're not being upfront with that. And so you're only going to make things worse for you if you try to go that route.
Yeah. Okay. That's really neat. I only hope someday I can be as in that sort of scenario. Well, let me shift a little bit here because I want to kind of talk a little bit more about your craft and in particular from one particular angle. That's that I find a lot when you start talking to people in different areas of the economy, whether it's engineering like me or in sciences, or whether you're or investment and financing or marketing or whatnot. A lot of us, I think, have almost caricature views of what folks in differing sectors in our own kind of how they operate, what they do, and sometimes we have some very problematic views of what the work is, what goes on, And what I'm curious about it is, as a craftsman and in doing some high level business stuff too, do you find that fellow Christians in particular, or I mean anybody for that matter, I suppose, have misconceptions about what your work is, what that looks like, what it means to do what you do at such a high level, and how do you try to explain that to people, say in your church or in your community, to help them understand more of the context and what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how this all works together and generates value for people?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because unfortunately, all the stereotypes are true of
Yeah.
contractors and construction. So,
Mhm.
and I address those things in my sales pitch when I'm talking to clients and when I'm talking to those in church, because I've heard way too many stories of oh, my friend in church is a contractor, he's a painter, whatever else, and then doing a poor job,
Yeah.
and so those things are difficult to deal with and address, and so the one thing that is I've always tried to do, or even trying to change the stereotypes even within Las Vegas, is address those things up front.
Mhm.
And I'm aware of them, and so I know that you're the customer, or even the person talking to a church, is they need to see in some clear ways that you're not just like everybody else.
Mhm.
And so, when I talk about the clients that I deal with or the jobs that I'm working on, and I even talk about, oh man, we screwed up here. I have a real doozy of a one if you want me to share it,
Yeah.
about just, the here's what happens in my business, and here's how I try to address those things. And
Mhm.
here's what you can expect from me. And so when you address those concerns or those stereotypes, it really helps people to get past that. So then you can actually have a good conversation, a meaningful conversation about my trade, what it is that I do, how I interact,
Mhm.
how I do business, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's an old saying where, an expert is someone who has made every mistake possible in a field. And I wonder if in some respects, you're what you just said, like, you'll be totally upfront, like instead of presenting a success story, maybe you present a non-success story and how you fixed it. And does that
Right.
present confidence? And it sounds like kind of like that's what you're doing. It's like, does that present confidence to the potential client? That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, because I will tell clients, or even anyone, it's like, hey, oh yeah, we've tried that before. It didn't work out real well, and so and so here's why we do this and this, or here I do things this way because of these past failures. And so
Mm,
when they see, they go, oh, okay, this isn't a guy who just says yes that he can do everything in the world that you ask him to do,
mhm,
and he actually has experience of working through these things, and
mm.
so he is an expert at what I'm asking him to do.
So it's almost like radical honesty pays off, huh?
It it hasn't let me down.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's something that that's something I've tried to. I learned when I was even a grad student, in engineering, and I've tried to kind of pass on to people who I've worked with, whether subordinates or people are on a parallel path. Even is that just by being radically honest about what you can truthfully say about a skill, a product, an experiment, a result. All of those things matter, and they really communicate something to to whoever you're working with, whether it's an internal customer for your own company or an external customer, a client, like what you experience regularly. And
Yeah,
that's just so important, and I find that to be even more important with time,
yeah, absolutely.
and experience. Yeah.
It's a good term for the Bible, that faithfulness in all things, with your family, with your work, with your clients. It's one of those things you God says you will not be put to shame, and so
Mm.
you're not if you can stick with that.
Yeah, yeah. That's the sort of character that we need to, keep building both in ourselves and communicating that to our children and all of that. So that's really good. It's really good. Thank you for kind of, unpacking that again for us here. That's great. So as we begin to kind of draw to a little bit to a close here, I was hoping you might, go back in time a little bit. Let's do a little thought experiment here. I like to ask this of all of our guests, and imagine you could go back in time and give your younger self some advice about, your faith and your business and the way that's going to play out together. based on some of the lessons you've learned and even the stuff we've talked about today, what are the kinds of things that you would want to be communicating to, say, maybe your 18-year-old pastry chef self again, or something to that effect? What sorts of things would you say there?
Oh man, there's so many. I think two of the biggest ones for me would be one on the faith side is you're not just a Christian in the business world, but that, whatever capacity, whether you're in business or you're an employee, that your workplace is also your ministry. And so, it's not enough to just be a Christian in the workplace, but see it as ministry opportunity in those areas. I wish I would have seen that much younger and, really chase after that. The other area I would say it's, very important to think about where it is that you want to be in your life in terms of the effort required and what it takes to get there. Everyone thinks, oh, I'm going to work hard and I'm going to make it to the top. And so hard work doesn't get you to the top. Now, it's an important piece of it. And I would say learning to, in the Christian world, craftiness is almost seen as a bad word. As Christians, we should be crafty in the sense of being creative and finding those creative ways to be more influential in the workplace and to get to those places you have ambitions to be. And so it was one of those things that I always saw craftiness as, being unethical or doing wrong. And so it's funny, as I learned in the corporate world that you can be a good Christian and be also very, very crafty in a way that allows you to expand your ministry and glorify God in the things that you do.
Yeah, I think it's really important to kind of differentiate that this aspect of, yes, it's important to work hard, but you also need to work hard on the right things.
Yes.
And in order to identify the right things that you could say, like, I'm going to go dig 100 holes out in this field over here for this guy. But then the guy comes back to you and says, I only needed one hole and it was over here.
Right.
Like you haven't done, you worked really hard for nothing. And so, it's important to work hard, but also to have that kind of craft, like, as you say, craftiness about you, as seems, I think, really crucially important. And it's just a really important skill to learn. Do you have any tips that, like, what would you tell a young person to kind of focus on or kind of consider as they are, maybe they are ready to work hard, but how do you become more crafty like that?
So for me, I would say fail your way to success is one way. And in a sense of, take a risk and try something. Don't be foolish, but it's okay to go, hey, I'm going to try this and see how it works out. Well, that didn't work. And what did you learn from it? And so it's amazing what you can learn from your failures. You learn usually a lot more from your failures than you do your successes. And so you can learn to be crafty in ways where, oh, I said this to a person and that didn't go over well. So I need to rephrase that. Like, what I wanted to communicate was right, but the way I communicated it just did the opposite of what I wanted. And so again, going back to, it was, great for years to be able to test stuff on my wife and kids because I could say something and they just go, what are you even? Don't ever say that to anybody. And so then I could go, okay, let me rethink that. And so I would say that's one thing that's worked really well for me. Now, some people are scared that, failing is something that really just scares them. And so I would say if you're not willing to go that route, you need to have great examples around you of people who are crafty and creative in those ways. And so that you can see craftiness working its way out. And so then you can see where some of the pitfalls are and where the successes are that you can learn from and then utilize in whatever field you're in.
Yeah. Dude, that's great. And I think that's really, really wise words to keep in mind especially for our younger viewers who are growing up and learning about these things and operating in the world today. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. So Nathan, before we go, let everybody know here real quick how they can kind of find you online. If you have a website, Twitter handle, any of those sorts of things that you'd like to share with everybody.
Yeah, so we have a website, briansmasterpiece.com, or you can find us on Instagram at Brian's Masterpiece. And so you can see the work that we do and what we're capable of. And so we do more than just wood floors. So we do staircases and walls, ceilings, decks, if you want something with it. And I also am doing something that is in our industry is shunned upon, but I think it's really cool. And I use high voltage electricity to burn through the wood and add epoxy. And so it's extremely dangerous because there are no second chances. If you get zapped, you die.
That sounds like fun.
It's a great time. So yeah, I enjoy it because it's really cool. I get to be creative. So, but those would be the best places you can find.
Awesome. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for joining us once again and being a part of Faith Ventures here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Norman. I appreciate the time.
And that's been our show today. We'll see you next time.